All right, so welcome back to the Cognition School Podcast. My name is Satoshi Takano. We are located in Vaughan here, and the weather is getting nicer, and we have a very, very, very special guest today. My very good friend Kenny Ryan, who's had a fantastic career from a hockey player in the pros and getting drafted to the Toronto Maple Leafs, all the way to now transitioning to another chapter in his life as an NHL certified agent. So, Kenny, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm glad I'm able to come on and finally connect with you here.
Yeah, great, great. And first of all, where are you located right now?
So I'm in Cleveland. I'm originally from the Detroit area. I grew up there, but when I retired from playing, I met my wife when I was playing here in Cleveland. We have a young family here, so that's where I am.
Awesome, awesome. And what's the hockey like in Cleveland right now?
It's growing. In Ohio they have, for the most part, Cleveland Barons, obviously, Blue Jackets as well. But I think I've always thought Cleveland's unique, just the location of it. With Detroit, Chicago, you have Toronto, you have Pittsburgh. So I've enjoyed my time here, and definitely trying to help and grow the game however I can in the area.
Yeah, and I know that you're doing some development work in Cleveland as well, right?
Definitely.
Is that something you still do?
Yeah, I help out with the Cleveland Barons here and their youth program, which I've really enjoyed getting on the ice with players in their program, and then other local guys in the summer. Some training on ice. I really enjoy that side of it as well from my playing background. I think it's a great way to connect with guys, get to know them on a different level than just phone calls and seeing them in a rink and things like that. But yeah, we're putting in some time here to try and really impact the younger players and produce good hockey players and people.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And I know you were at our facility, our old facility actually,
Yep.
a little while ago, and we've since now moved. And yeah, you definitely have to check this place out.
Yeah, I mean, I think I came up to watch a tournament maybe over a year ago or so, and we connected, and I wanted to pop in. We've kind of kept in touch, and it was kind of great for me to see all that you're doing, and the science behind it, and the technology, and just the knowledge that you have in this field. And for me, it's was just trying to learn, right, and kind of see what you're doing, and maybe there's something that I can bring back, or we could have more conversations about. So I look forward to coming up again here, hopefully soon, and checking out your new place.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we've since transformed because obviously we've got a lot more room now, and teams are now coming in, and we're doing some work there. So definitely it's it took a while. It was a proof of concept to, when you came up here, and that's why I mean there's different phases, but now I think we're ready to go, and not just obviously work in hockey, but in other
Right,
sports as well, because I
for
think
sure.
I think it's also important. Yeah.
Right.
So let me kind of ask you some basic questions, because obviously, my audience is typically kind of the parent community for the most part, and some coaches and some players. Maybe if you could give a little bit of your playing background, because I think that's fascinating as well. Like, where did you play growing up? I know you grew up
Yeah.
in the Detroit area, but
So I grew up in Detroit. I came from I would say more so a football family, but like, an athletic family. I have two older brothers, but I grew up playing in Detroit. I played for Honey Baked my entire youth hockey, which, I find a little bit different than today. I kind of started in the same team, and that's where I finished. I was fortunate to be selected to go play for the U.S. National Development Program for 2 years, which was in Ann Arbor at the time. Now it's in Plymouth. Had a phenomenal experience there. Uh, and then I, went to Boston College. The rules were different then. I, committed very young. I believe I think it was Thanksgiving time of eighth grade. So it was young making that decision. I ended up going there, and I was there for a couple months. Ended up leaving, went and played in Windsor in the OHL, which I had a phenomenal experience there, and was fortunate to be drafted by the Leafs and have a 8 or 9 year pro career that took me all different places, met all different people, and a lot of ups and downs and stories and things along the way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think for those that may not be familiar, like the path that you took in terms of transitioning from you went from I guess high school to college, right? And then from college you went back to Windsor. So what was that transition like? Because I know people are trying to obviously go, I mean, obviously the rules have changed now,
Of
right?
course.
So you kind of get to the OHL to college. What made you come back to
Yeah.
Windsor?
So for me, it was interesting. Just at the time when I made that decision, right? I was super young. My
And
parents,
you said eighth grade?
I was in eighth grade. Yeah. Yep.
Holy smokes.
And my parents were great through it, right? They guided me through it, but at the end of the day, they weren't forcing me to go here or there. It was, essentially my decision, right? And making that decision, I had two brothers that went to U of L. One played football there. My dad played football at Notre Dame, and we had some ties to Boston College as well, where I ended up going. And it was a phenomenal experience while I was there. But at that time, right, I think for me, it was more just a personal decision. I always had interest in the OHL. It was close to home. And so for me, it was kind of one of those, I was 1 foot through the door, not two, while I was at Boston College. And we made a family decision, right? We thought at that time it was best for me. Obviously, Boston College is a phenomenal program. I mean, anybody who has an opportunity to go there, I mean, it's a phenomenal school. But at that time for myself, it was best for me to, we thought go to Windsor and play there. And we had a great team, a great experience. Ironically enough, Boston College that same year won the national championship, and we won the Memorial Cup in Windsor. So it worked out in that way, but it's making that decision to go to Windsor. The relationships and connections that I've made in the hockey community, I wouldn't trade those and experiences for anything. And I'm sure I, probably could have said the same thing if I stayed at Boston College and what that would have looked like as well. Pros and cons to everything, but at the end of the day, that was, kind of a decision that my family and I took some time, walked through a lot. And it was a hard one for sure, but, no regrets by any means with it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome because I think that's the one thing that I find that people don't particularly understand is that players themselves have the ultimate decision-making power, right? That it shouldn't be just dictated because that's what everybody else did, right? And yeah,
I completely agree with that. Even on my side of, what I do now and, representing players and on the agency side, every kid that I work with, it's probably the former player in me, but I tell all of them, nobody's going to look after your career more than you will, right? At the end of the day, nobody ever will. So you have to be in charge of, the decisions that are being made, right? And, part of what I do is trying to educate kids and their families and what scenarios could look like or where conversations are. But, the players I always find need to be in, control of their career and have, that tight circle of people that they trust around them to lean on their guidance and have the right people around them to trust in what they're saying. And um,
yeah. I certainly find that even to this day, there are players that were playing college hockey and there's a couple players like that are in the OHL now, right? That have moved from college to coming back to the OHL.
Definitely. And, I would say it kind of goes back to the old saying, right? Like if there was one path, everybody would take it, right? If there was hey, this will get you to whatever your goal is, right? Everybody has different goals within hockey, whether it's the NHL, whether it's college hockey, whether it's I want to play juniors. Everybody's kind of level of success is different within what they view that as, right? But, at the end of the day, I think it provides some more options for players, right? I think it makes it difficult for others as well. Um, but I know for myself, you know, looking back now in my own career, right? Probably at 14, I probably would have waited a little bit to make that decision on where I was going to be, 4 years later that could, kind of dictate the path of what I'm going to be doing, not just as a hockey player, but as a person. So I think the rule changes with regards to committing, college conversations, and all that, I think it's great. And then with the OHL or the CHL rule changes, I just think it opens up options for some, and it makes it more challenging and difficult for others as well.
When you first heard about that rule change for NCAA, like what were kind of your initial thoughts around the CHL players being able to get to NCAA?
Yeah. Again, I initially kind of thought back on my own career and just, what that would have looked like, how that maybe would have changed things for better or for worse, right? But kind of just reiterating, I think it changed the landscape. Can't really say, we know exactly how it's going to impact. I think you've seen some changes recently, right? Kids leaving, kids committing. You opened up a player pool of 1,500 players from, you can argue, right, the top league in junior hockey. And now those players can all go play college hockey for the most part, right? So it changes the recruiting, it changes the landscape of it, but what is the impact of it? Well, I think that's still to be determined, right? You have, like this spring coming up on the junior side of thing, you have different drafts that are coming up. How does that affect, right? And then the trickle down, not just to now, but what do things look like in 2 to 3 years, right? Where are a lot of kids being recruited from? What are, leagues or players trying to really push to get to? Who's doing a great job on the development side? I think there's a lot of, unknowns, but we try and take the knowledge that we have and, apply it to make those educated decisions and choices, when players have those options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important for both parents and players to kind of at least get educated on the landscape and how it's changing, and as opposed to what you see online or just hearsay, right? Like, and so I always think it's important to get the right information, especially because I think parents, for the most part, they're mostly at the rinks. They're talking to parents. They're talking to, I heard this kid is doing this, so maybe I should do that. So they're not necessarily having a strategy per se. That they're just kind of bouncing around a little bit. Like, what kind of advice would you give to parents for those that, especially with kids that have that opportunity to maybe get to that next level
Yeah.
in terms of getting some assistance there?
So I think it's very interesting, right? Just how players train now and the development process, and more so at the youth ages, the younger ages. Hockey, all of a sudden, in the recent years, has kind of turned into a year-round sport, right? For right or wrong, it just has. I grew up where end of March threw my hockey bag in the basement, and I, was a competitive swimmer in the summer, right? I tell a joke still to this day, like the brick tournament that everybody talks about, I wasn't allowed to go to because my mom said I had a swim meet, right? So it's being an athlete, I really believe in, right? I don't believe in the specialization at a younger age specifically. I think playing all different sports, and the social aspect, being around different kids, I think is very important. There obviously comes a time where, some players, okay, now it's time to focus a bit more on one craft compared to another. But, like little things like getting off the ice, right? Like everybody wants to be on the ice. Everybody wants to do their, skill sessions and all that. And there's definitely value in that, right? There's benefits to that. But as kids get older, right? I mean, there's benefits to being in the gym, right? And I tell kids that all the time is, you need to have the same approach, to your on ice training as you do with your off ice, your gym, your warm up, your cool down, cognitive training, like all of those things I think are so important. But a lot of kids I feel like now are just, I got to be on the ice. I got to be on the ice. And, as when you get older, everybody's good. Everybody can skate. Everybody can stick handle. Everybody can shoot. So it becomes a little bit more, you got to figure out what your craft is, what makes you successful, and those nuances within the game, right? So I think training is just kind of, it's all over the place now, and everybody wants so much of it. But I just believe in kind of building out your program. What does that look like for you? How are you going to get the most out of that? And yeah, we live in a world where, hey, he's doing that. Am I missing out on something? And that's where I think just having some conversations, you don't need to run around to 8, 9, 10 camps, right? Well, where's the consistency in your training, your habits, hey, I got to get up every day at this time, and your structure, right? As all these players get older, I find the more structured you are, especially off the ice at the higher levels, the more success that you'll probably have on the ice.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And especially with your point with the multi-sport for sure, that we see, impacts with kids that have played other sports. And it doesn't have to be anything specific. Could just be, soccer or basketball or lacrosse or anything that involves some other skill sets that they may not have picked up just playing hockey. Like in your case, you were swimming, so I mean, obviously there's benefits to that as well. And so I definitely think that parents need to kind of maybe take a step back a little bit and go, okay, how do I build an athlete as opposed to just a hockey player,
Yep,
especially at the younger ages?
for sure. Um, Obviously, I'll talk about one of my clients, but AJ Spelsey, um, he's playing in Windsor right now, and he's an athlete his whole life. He didn't start playing hockey truly year round until his first year in the OHL. He's a special athlete, but he would play football until end of November, grab his hockey bag, play from December until March, and then he wouldn't touch his hockey bag until the next November, right? And a lot of kids don't do that, and that can be obviously hard to do, but the athletic side of it, right? The learning different things that can translate to all sports that you don't get if you're just on the ice. I only skate, I only play hockey, and this is what I do. I don't know if that is beneficial, right? Especially at the younger ages. For some, it may, but I think that's kind of still out there to be determined.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. The other thing I wanted to ask, and this is more of a relative to your NHL kind of path, but what was it like for you to get drafted by the Leafs? And obviously we're in Toronto, so I'd love
Yeah,
to kind of hear what's it like to get drafted by Toronto.
it was incredible, to be honest. It's you're the mecca of hockey, right? Being drafted by an original six team. Brian Burke at the time was the GM, and I'll never forget it. Go down, shake his hand, right? It's most exciting day of my life to that point, and Mr. Burke, thank you so much, and for drafting me. And the first thing he said was, "It's not Mr. Burke, it's Berkey," right? And I just had a good laugh at that. But what I take away from that day was, I think right after he said that was, congratulations, but there's a lot of people that are upset right now, that are today they thought this was going to be their opportunity. And something that's always stuck with me is, he said, this is nothing more than a pat on the back, right? Now you got to get back to work. And um, it just, you think you work your whole kind of life to get to that stage within hockey, if that's your goal. And I was able to achieve that side of it, but then it was, okay, congrats, back to it, right? And that's the reality of it. So it was a very exciting day in the experience with Toronto, and playing with the Marlies there for 3 years, and the memories and friends that I've made and connections and all things like that. But yeah, Toronto's, I tell people here in the States, it's the New York City of Canada. And I was fortunate to live there and play hockey there.
Yeah. Any notable names of guys that you played with throughout your Marlies career?
Yeah, probably the biggest one was Nazem Kadri. And Nas was there for a bit. Jake Gardner was there. It was during the lockout as well. It was my second year. We had some guys down too that were playing up until I think it was December, January. But like being in camps with those guys, right? And you've obviously been over there. You kind of share the same arena, so you're separated, but they're you see them around, right? And so that's the one thing that I remember as a young player is being around some of the NHL guys at that time. It was, they're all still just guys, right? I remember being a little bit nervous and, I can't believe that's, there's Phil Kessel or, whomever it may be. But you have some conversations, you end up going for lunch with them or whatever it may be. And, there's guys that are, exceptional at what they do and, have a real passion and love for the game of hockey. And at that level, as you know, it truly is how can I get better day to day and trying to be the best, not just in practice or in the game. It's, a lot of guys I find at that level, they want to be the best at what they do, period. And that's, something that I remember taking away from some of those small conversations was just, applying yourself day to day to day.
Yeah, I definitely can attest to the human element of players, right? That you kind of see them outside of the arena, and at the end of the day, they're just regular people, right? Speaking of Kadri, I actually sat next to him at a sushi restaurant, and so we're at the bar there, and obviously Kadri's like right there, and we didn't even talk about hockey. It's really more about what's it like to live in Calgary. Like it's freezing cold out there, right?
For
And
sure.
yeah, so he's one of the nicest guys I've met. And we didn't even talk about hockey at all. It was just more just as a human being, right?
Right. Like you hear people talk all the time about guys when they retire and, the transition out of hockey. Yeah, guys miss playing the game, of course, and the competition part. But most guys talk about, I miss the locker room, right? I miss the conversations. And I think that's, really, what it comes down to are those relationships, like you're saying. And, yeah, you can talk about hockey all you want, but it's more so, people in this community, you can, just like you and I, right? We can sit down, have a conversation for an hour, and I think we've met in person once or twice, right? But we've had dialogue, and it's just those conversations and enjoying, the people that you're around.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of which, obviously from a relationship point of view, having played in the, and the AHL, you've now kind of transitioned to a new chapter in your career as an agent. What was that like for you? Having transitioned?
Yeah, I never really thought I'd be on this side of hockey, to be honest with you. Um, it's, when I stopped playing, I moved back to Detroit. I was in player development there and, was figuring out what's my next, I don't want to say move, but, I was doing some different jobs and I was looking for, okay, well, I want a career, right? I want to work towards something that, I can keep working away at. And for me, it really started more so on the development side. It started being on the ice with guys and having just those, almost closed doors conversations where I'm, as a former player, but working with players, like players are vulnerable when they're on the ice, right? You can learn a lot about them, whether you're putting them through something where, they're going to fail. It's going to be challenging. Okay. How do they respond to that? Right. And I find get to know a player on a much more personal level that way. And that's something that I've really enjoyed working with players kind of in that light, right? So being able to get on the ice, have those relationships, work with players, I thought really helped me indirectly. When I was in Detroit, I also coached a girls team, U16 team there that I was 2 years out of hockey. I hadn't been in a team environment, and that was probably the best thing that I did, right? I mean, it made me fall kind of back in love with the game. I was, for right or wrong, I was, a little bitter with hockey and just, kind of how I left playing and different things that, happen in one's career. Um, but I was able to kind of start having some conversations and, I started talking to a couple different groups and ended up talking with Kaizen Sports Agency, who, I'm currently with. And, conversations led to another and, started working with some players. And I think that's where I really started to enjoy it because you work with all different players, all different backgrounds from all over, the world, essentially. And for me, it was kind of figuring out, okay, what makes a player tick? What are the concerns? What does he need to work on? And like we were talking about earlier, is kind of mapping that out and okay, let's build something together, right? Let's that circle that I talked about, well, through conversations. Doesn't happen overnight, but can we start to trust each other in that way, right? That's why, for me, I've really enjoyed this side of it, is the relationship with the player and, being a part of their process, and the good times, the bad times, the moments of crisis, moments of excitement, all of those things, right? Because I can remember it, right? When you're going through it, that is the biggest thing in your life. That is the biggest thing in your career. When I got cut from that AAA team, or when I, didn't make the select team, or I thought I was going to be playing juniors and I get sent back to wherever it may be, that's the biggest moment in their hockey career. So it's being aware of that, right? Having some sympathy for that, but also, okay, well, here's our plan, right? And I think that's ultimately what people want to hear, the communication aspect of it and being in somebody's corner, right? And I know for myself, I don't bat it 1,000% every time with it, but that is something that I know myself and our group, we take a lot of pride in, is, making sure that we do have those real relationships with the players, and not just now and not just when things are good, but in, 2, 3 years when things go quiet and things aren't going well, maybe for somebody. That's where I think the relationship really matters.
I think to an extent you're almost like kind of a guardian slash psychologist slash representative, like almost like their motherly or fatherly figure, right? So like you probably wear a bunch of different hats when you're working with your athletes.
For sure. I do. And again, I can't speak for an athlete and what they want, but those are some of the things that I find I try and offer, right? There's some kids that, hey, they want to talk after every game, or can we text? And yeah, no problem. And there's kids where, hey, I'm going to talk to you, once a week, once every, 2 weeks, whatever it may be. And everybody's different in that way with what works for them, and trying to figure out how do I help you, right? I don't want to add more to your plate. I don't want you to think, Kenny's calling, I got to get back to him, but I'm supposed to be, doing X, Y, or Z. No problem. We'll talk whenever you're ready. But it's somebody ultimately knowing that there's somebody in their corner that they can trust is actually in their corner, and building that relationship, as they move forward. There's definitely the professionalism within it in our conversations with players, but I'd be lying to you if there wasn't the friendship side of it as well. And, being able to talk about things that aren't hockey, and being able to joke around a little bit, and, really have that relationship. Because I know on my side of it, I always wanted to be able to reach out to somebody and not feel intimidated, or like, I don't know if I should or shouldn't, whether it's a younger player or, a college player, a professional player. That level of comfort, I think, is super important. And that just comes from having that true relationship.
Yeah, for sure. I think in any situation, like I mean, what was that movie with Tom Cruise? The
Which one?
sports agent. The sports agent one.
Jerry Maguire?
Oh, Jerry Maguire. Well, any resemblance to anything in that movie at all with what you're doing?
Like, I mean, that's obviously Hollywood's Hollywood, right? And making their movies. But, I think on my side of it, I really take pride in the players that I work with. And I think anybody in this business should, and just going back to kind of what I was saying, is I think all of these players have so much now kind of going on, right? There's so many options. There's access to everything. You can, oh, this kid's doing that, or I'm doing this. And I think that can be very challenging for players, instead of just, hey, I got a game tonight, I'll go to school today and I'll see you guys at the rink and I'll talk to you at practice, the following. So there's a lot of outside influences that I think are more, a lot more than they used to be. I wouldn't necessarily say this directly correlates with, Jerry Maguire, but, the work in it. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And I would say most of it's unseen, right? We have our conversations with clients or players or meetings or Zooms or seeing them in games, but that's, probably the smallest aspect of it, right? There's the phone calls, there's the other meetings with people about them, there's the conversations, there's many different things, right? But it's something that I really enjoy. Um, Again, being a part of, and when you see a player or their family, when a kid gets to that point of accomplishing what their goal is, or it got them to that next step, and just kind of that glimpse of excitement, or the reward for their hard work at the end of the day, that for me is very exciting.
Yeah. I recently had another podcast interview with Philip Barsky from Bloomington. One of the things he was mentioning to me was, for this is really more for the parents, right? That the parents are the players, the kids' agents until they get an agent. And just wanted to get your sense on, when do you consider an agent to work with your son or daughter? And what do you look for in an agent?
Yeah. Um, I think that's a great question, because I think it's changed so much. When I was growing up, I wasn't approached by an agent until Thanksgiving. My junior year is my first year at the U.S. national program. So it was a year and a half out from the NHL draft. Now it seems to just be getting younger and younger, right? I think a lot of parents, right or wrong, can get excited, and kids do too. Of, hey, an agent wants to talk to me, and they're so and so, and they their group represents these players, and what I would say more so to that at the younger ages is, how is he going to help my son now actively, right? Phone calls are great, but my son's, say, 13, right? 14. There are agencies that are talking to these young players. So what are they doing for them? Outside of, hey, do an agency camp in the middle of summer for 4 days and we'll be on the ice. Yeah, that's great. And there's value in things like that. But, when it's November and he's 14 years old or 13 years old, and he's 2 years outside of the USHL or CHL draft, right? And these are things that the kid probably isn't even thinking of yet. How is he helping him day to day, week to week? How is he supporting the parents? What are those conversations look like? And again, is there a real relationship, or is it just, hey, I work with this agency, I'm a great player, and when I'm at a point of, hey, there's a draft, or hey, there's a contract, this is out of our kind of realm, does that guy kind of come back into the picture? And I think that's where, for myself, and I know our group, that's where we try and separate ourselves a bit, is having some of those relationships, and actively helping and working with players and all different areas, but especially at the younger ages as well.
Yeah.
So
And yeah, go ahead.
no, so I was just say, I don't know if there's a exact age. I think it's just more so for the player and the family. When do they feel that it's right? Because nothing, yes, there's movement in youth hockey, right? Unfortunately, I would almost say now. And then you get into the junior realm of things, but making sure that that person's somebody you trust. It's not just you've talked to for a week, and hey, this sounds great, and selling you all the bells and whistles. Do your research, have conversations, take those conversations to others, and have some comparables. And at the end of the day, it's a decision that you and your family are making, nobody else.
Yeah. Any kind of misconceptions from players or parents that you kind of hear relative to, having an agent, or having that, what their expectation is versus, what you're able to provide realistically?
I think everybody has their own kind of opinion on how somebody operates, or what agencies or an agent does. I know for myself, like, I'm very transparent with players and their families, right? Like, I tell certain kids, whether it's right or wrong, like, I can't get you on a team. I can't, but I can help you in those conversations, right? I can open up dialogue, but your performance, your on ice play, your preparation, your training, your approach, that's what gets you on the team, right? I'll support you. I can, like I said, have those conversations. And don't get me wrong, I, work very hard to help players achieve those goals. But at the end of the day, the player has to be self-motivated. And there's some hard conversations. There's some very honest conversations. But that's when, I lean back to that relationship of knowing the player and working with him and knowing that I'm saying certain things not because I don't believe in them, because I know there's more, right? Or whatever that conversation may look like. But I think the expectations are something, depending on who the player is, where he is in his career. Those are, things that should be kind of laid out there early in conversations of what the expectations are, but not just on my side, but also on the athlete side, right? Here are kind of some expectations that we have for you, right? Of players that we want to work with. We want high character kids, highly motivated. The list goes on, but it's a two-way street as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's conversations I hear all the time, and where some people think that, because I'm represented by so and so, I should be able to go anywhere, or that, my agent should be able to do this and do that and run around and do this. In the meantime, the performance of that particular player may not be up to par, right? So yeah, so I hear that sometimes, and I go, are you sure it's not just,
Well,
that it's, two way,
yeah,
right?
in a simple way, right? It's kind of like, hey, if you had 4 weekends of games and all 4 weekends, the film wasn't up to par compared to a different point in the season when you had four weekends that were great of games, what conversation's easier to take to a GM based off of current play, right? So when you look at it from that perspective, obviously it's easier to go to speak to somebody when the kid's playing, top of his game. But that's where also when he isn't playing well, the relationship, knowing the player, knowing the kid, the family, that's where there are some conversations of, hey, he's going through it. He's in a learning curve. There's a development aspect. His coach is, working on there's a reasoning as to why his game maybe isn't at the place he would like it to be. But knowing the athlete, that's where we're able to have those conversations, right? And talk about where he is now and how he's going to get to those 4 great weekends.
Yeah. Um, let's talk about, let's say a player is developing or generating the points and the stats, and it looks great. And obviously you've had conversations with teams about specific players that may be generating, a ton of points and so on. But what else are they teams looking for over and above just points? Because let's say you have a player that is, reliable, that's doing all the right things, not necessarily getting the stats at that point in time. So they may be down on themselves, like, oh, I'm not scoring, I'm not getting. What do you tell those types of kids? And also, do teams really kind of focus on just the stats, or are they looking at other things?
For sure. I think all players need to create an identity, right, within their team, but that identity within themselves needs to change year to year. Like players maybe enter, let's use the NHL as an example. They'll enter the NHL maybe as something, but at the end of their career, it wasn't what they entered as, right? You may enter as a fourth line, penalty kill, maybe getting a couple fights a year, and then 8 years later you're scoring 30 goals, you're on the first power play, and you're playing the last minute of the game. His identity from year one is much different than the last year. Now there's parts and pieces that of course that player takes with them throughout their career. But for me, when I watch players, it's how do you impact the game? And if you look at the NHL, I'm not sure the exact number, but I would guess this year, probably 20 goal scorers on each team is probably under four, on an average, right? So you just take those numbers alone, like you want to be a goal scorer in the NHL. I mean, we're talking about NHL All-Stars, right? 20 goal scorers. I mean, elite players. There's 3 to 4 on a team. What are the other guys doing? Right. So having kind of an understanding of where you are within your team and how you're going to be successful within that, how you're going to impact, how you're going to be noticed, right? Because not every guy is going to be on the half wall on a power play. Not every guy is going to run, up top, whatever the system may be. So I just find that whatever you do, you have to do it better than the other, 39 guys that are, on the ice essentially, and impacting in that way. Now, as a younger player, um, oh yeah, like a lot of guys that continue to move on, yeah, they do have some success, offensively when they're younger and all things like that. But the kid who's scoring 50 goals when he's 13, there's a good chance he's not scoring 50 goals when he's 18. But how does he stay relevant, right? How does he continue to keep moving forward? Yeah, he's a goal scorer, but you know, can he pull a puck off the boards? Can he protect the puck? Can he play in traffic? You know, intangible things, right? And I think ultimately, as kids get older, I know for myself, I mean, it's all about compete, right? Because that's at every level that never changes. You have to have unwavering compete level, but impacting the game, and it's not always going to be on the score sheet. It could be big block shot, it can be a hit, it can be many different things, but making sure that you're impacting and you stand out, right? When somebody leaves the rink, if they never seen a hockey game and they had a piece of paper and a pen and they're watching, they were told to write down 3 numbers of people that you notice. Did they notice you? And again, it's not always points, but those are the things. As players get older, these organizations are building teams, right? You can't have 15 guys that are going to run the half wall. It just won't work, right? From on ice and off ice, dealing with all guys being upset and all of that good stuff. So it's really finding what do I do well, and I'm going to do it better than anybody else every night, and I'm going to keep developing the other sides of my game.
And that's a great point too. I mean, I was talking to a scout a long time ago, and they were talking about a specific player that was generating over 100 points, right, in the OHL. And the one thing that he was also always saying was, if those players are getting, let's say, over 100 points in the OHL, number one, who are they playing with, right? Is that player's success based on the other player's success as well? So let's say the other player was also getting over 100 points. Well, chances are you're getting it because he's getting it,
Right.
right? Like he's getting it,
Yep.
the puck over to you. So let's say you take that player away. Can he still generate 100 points on his own? Right. And then the second thing I heard was, what kind of systems are they playing? Because if they obviously, you get drafted to the NHL, you go to a team that has a completely different system. Can you still generate the points based on a different system? And this particular play was a forward. So what if that forward, who's a left winger, now we put him on the right side? Can you still generate the same type of performance? And if any one of those is a maybe or a no, then there's more questions that pop up. And then the fourth one was, where on the ice was he getting those points from? Because if they're in the house, chances are in the NHL level, you're not going to get in the house. So can you still generate those 100 points?
For
So
sure.
I heard that and I was like, oh wow, like I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think another thing too, just to add to all that, is something that isn't necessarily maybe talked about as much when it comes to what do you look for in a player and what do teams look for, is also their parents, right? Like, how is the kid raised? What are the values? What type of morals do they have? After a game, stand maybe in the lobby, how does the kid go up to his parents, right? Is he hugging his mom, or different things like that? Like, there's big value in that, because I've always found when things start to get tough, that's where you really start to see, the type of people that you're dealing with, the type of character, and the things, that make up the, people that you're working with. So it's something that I've really value is, hey, the kid's great hockey player, all of that. But I want to meet his parents, right? I want to talk with his parents. I want to learn about them a bit. And I think that's, very important.
Yeah, and I'm sure you go through that even as an agent as well, to make sure that you're looking for all those little things that are off ice activities, right? Like in terms of what they're doing and how they're being raised.
Absolutely. It's beyond important, right? Because I'm only seeing glimpses of the player, especially when first meeting and talking with them, but making sure that there's conversations with their parents and, what do they like, right? What do they believe in? How do they raise their kid? What's acceptable? What isn't acceptable? And a lot of those just come out naturally, just in conversations when you're just kind of learning more about somebody. But it's very important.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Any kind of last minute advice for some of the parents and the players watching in terms of, you know, I mean, let's put in the context of a player that might be looking to do something like what you're doing and becoming an agent.
Yeah, I'm not sure what advice I think from the playing side, when you're going through it, right, you always want kind of what's next, right? Like, hey, I'm playing youth hockey. Oh, I can't wait to get to juniors. And you're in juniors, and whether things are going awesome, whether things, you're going through a hard time, it's always, well, next year, right? Well, next year. And oh, I can't wait to get to college, or I can't wait to get to pro, whatever it may be. Uh, it's easy for me to say this now looking back, but, kind of enjoy that process, right? Like, find a way to enjoy the heart and enjoy, the ups and downs of the long bus rides, all of that, because that's the fun stuff, right? As you get older, it only becomes more serious, becomes more of a business. The game itself, it's only a very small piece of it, right? So enjoying that process along the way, and for parents too, like, I mean, enjoy watching your kids play, enjoy watching them play down the street, whether it's youth hockey, whether it's junior, just enjoy it, right? Because it's not going to be there forever. Things will fall where they may. Hopefully you have the right people around you, supporting you and your son through that. But, um, hockey's a phenomenal game, and regardless of where it takes you, you're going to meet people and have experiences through that. And that's probably the thing for me that I'm most fortunate about, is the people that I've met through this game. It's pretty much given me everything that I have, my family to, what I do for a living.
Yeah, well, that's great advice. I think what you said enjoy the heart. I
Yep,
like I like that because, life is not easy.
exactly.
Yeah, I think you need to kind of enjoy every moment, even if it's that long bus ride. People think, oh, it's a crappy bus ride, but it's like, no, it's time to kind of, talk to people and to be
Yeah.
social and have a blast because that, 20 years later, you'll still be talking about some of those bus rides with your buddies.
I would bet most guys that aren't playing now, if you could, hey, you can come on a bus ride for the weekend, I bet most of them would take you up on that offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kenny, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for coming on today. I think having someone with your background and expertise, and kind of seeing that the transition from pro hockey to becoming an agent and still being able to be connected with the community, I think is really important. So, thank you very much for everything you're doing for the community, and I really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me out, and I really appreciate this. This was great, and look forward to chatting with you more here soon.
Sounds great. Sounds great. So thanks again, everyone, for joining the Cognition School podcast. We will see you on the next episode, and we'll talk to you very, very soon. Thank you.